Meetings, groups, classes. Question. There is great interest in meetings, groups, and classes. Are these forms the aims of Sufi teaching? Answer. People who do not understand how higher teachings operate, or who have been trained to think in a shallow manner about them, are naturally confused when they meet written and spoken materials which do not fit into their preconceived patterns. Nowhere is this more strikingly evidenced than in the matter of communication and relationships. After hearing a few hundred people explain how they feel, after reading a few dozen letters from seekers, even a machine would surely see the pattern of shallow assumption upon which even the most ardent of this type allow themselves to work. People who live in approximately the same area think that they should be grouped together willy-nilly. People who are not of a mind to read books agitate for personal contact. People who live in distant places crave travels, visits, materials to devour. People with whom you have been out of formal contact become distressed, bitter, interested in sources of readier gratification. People jealously, if unconsciously, cherish the cult of the center, whose distinguishing mark is the belief that, if I could only go to such and such a place, all would be well. Virtually none of these people has any true concept of how a real community comes into being, how it develops, how its local manifestations are working, what its future might be, how you could benefit from what is being done. If you circularize people with details of how a local class or group is run, they all want to be in a local class or group. It is just like mentioning a lollipop to a child. It may have been thinking about something else, but this key word can possess its thinking mechanism to the exclusion of everything else. For a moment, as an exercise, transpose this situation into some other field, and you will see that such behavior is so primitive, so crude, so unfortunately wasteful of energy or understanding of everything, that it is obvious that something has to be done for such people. Anyone prone to such behavior patterns is in no position to benefit from any higher knowledge at that point. He is, however, a suitable prey for one or other of the people or bodies which offer instant assuagement of tensions by going along with the individual's infantile behavior. The real higher community to which you could belong is organized and has its being and communication in its own manner. It needs and operates by means of both local and other groupings. Its members study, attract, retain, and give out currents of knowledge irrespective of the form in which their studies are couched. For some people, at some times, it is important that they be isolated from others. Such isolation, which is regarded as a curse by people who live in remote places, is generally an inestimable advantage which has been allotted to them, not anything else. As and when a time for closer contact in the conventional sense arrives, so do the means for its attainment. But if the individual simply wants to be a member of a herd, Sufis are prevented from pandering to this desire. In respect to higher teaching, the individual has to learn the difference between wants and needs. He can learn this only after basic teaching. When a child says that it needs something, it often means, until it understands the difference, that it wants that thing. I need a lollipop does not describe the situation at all. Only experience can show the difference between wants and needs. There is an inbuilt demand for togetherness in human beings. Whoever learns this and panders to it may quite easily become rich, famous, respected, and so forth. To play upon this tendency is not only wrong in ordinary principle, it is unproductive in our work, because it would mean that we were doing one thing while pretending to do another. Remember that because this work and this community operate in a manner essentially unique, they have no need for organizing in a primitive manner, or catering for neurotic or infantile demands disguised as needs. Furthermore, as soon as we have made this plain, and as soon as individuals and groups have realized that they need not indulge in their social masquerades, the community and the work invariably make it possible for the activity, the contact, the study, and the learning necessary to take place. In short, this community is neither a troop of baboons nor a military force, dependent upon desire and fear, upon reward and punishment for the continuance of its action. This community operates in accordance with a sensitive pattern. This pattern is its protection and its strength. If you try to organize yourself or others in a lesser pattern, you are out of touch with this work. You have, in short, disengaged yourself from higher development and chosen to stabilize your life upon simply living out your life by diversions, just like someone putting off time in a waiting room. Work in the manner and with the materials indicated by the teaching. Plan by all means if you really know the plan. The Sufi authority Abu Nasr al-Siraj illustrates the need for plan and priorities in study in his Kitab al-Luma. He quotes the words of one of the most eminent Sufis, Bayazid, who taught Abu Ali of Sind the formal rituals of Islam, while Abu Ali taught him, in his turn, the experiential doctrine of Sufism. And one of Bayazid's disciples reported that he heard not a word from his master for 13 years, the time he spent with him. The misunderstanding of the need or otherwise of constant association with a master as a kind of magic key is due, at least in part, to the deterioration in behavior of those very numerous groupings which were originally Sufis, but which have over the centuries become mere cults. Many ancient Sufis insisted on solitude and anonymity, refusing to associate with people. Muinuddin Chishti, who introduced Chishtism into India and is buried at Ajmer, was a notable example. While some of his precedents have been adopted by later followers, who imagine that they follow his teaching, his proclivity for solitude has been ignored. He would not allow, generally, says Dr. Sharib, more than one dervish to accompany him on his travels. He would stay in desolate and deserted places. Sometimes he would stay in a graveyard. The moment he came to be known, he would stay there no longer. He hated publicity. The great peril in study groupings is, of course, that they become miniature tribes or families, cults and frames for finding social satisfactions, not learning, let alone understanding. This pattern asserts itself, and often quite obviously, in most imaginedly religious communities and activities. For this reason, Sheikh Abdullah Ansari has called prayer only abstaining from food, formal prayer the work of old men and women, pilgrimage a pleasure of the world. People can learn from groups and meetings only to the extent to which they have overcome the 4 traps which Ansari stresses: ingratitude in good fortune, impatience in ill fortune, discontent with their lot, hesitation in serving their fellows. Internal dimensions. There are internal dimensions of meaning in all the materials used in our work. In these materials I include those written, spoken, seen, and handled, as well as the ones which are performed and experienced. The unlocking of the inner dimensions, as in all valid traditions, is something which has to take place as and when it can be effective. It is not a matter of detective work, puzzle solving, or disguised recreation. On the contrary, these elements must be kept in their places, which are very minor ones. The inner dimensions are present in order to convey a certain experience at the moment of their revelation. This experience supplies an element which the student needs in order to carry him further in his development. Unlocking inner dimensions just for the sake of so doing is not only superficial, it robs the operation of its development value. Take a rough example as an illustration. I say, "This is our work." This word comes to be associated with certain significances in the mind. Work means action. But if subsequently I reveal to you that work, in fact, also stands for, say, World Organization for Research into Knowledge, and is composed of the initials of that phrase, you see another range of possibilities in this. But merely to do this is banal when no constructive purposes are present. This is why the revealing of secrets is a stage after familiarization with the materials and concepts. The revealing must, and does, take place on a level and under circumstances appropriate to the goal, the development of humankind. Impatience with this process will simply turn you into a trivial person, playing with words, objects, and concepts. If you play with something complex, treating it as if it were simple, it will not operate to its real capacity. An electronic device, for instance, which may be extremely delicate, efficient, and costly, may simply look like an object used in a children's game. If you use it for playing games, you are playing, so do not deceive yourself that it is acting on a more effective part of you just because it is not a disc of wood, and because the game delights or depresses you. There is hardly a derivative book on metaphysics in currency in which the author has succeeded in avoiding this tendency, and fewer still which are not distorted in meaning by their readers. There is small wonder that more conventional people laugh at metaphysicians, and that most of the latter succeed mainly in teaching themselves and others to play diversionary games with what can be, in fact, vital materials. There is a need to repeat this in different forms because of the fact that people are surrounded, all the time, by game tendencies, within and without themselves, which can be counteracted only by an appropriate quantity and quality of the other type of material, and descriptions of its uses. Remember, the mere study and absorption of such admonitions as this give you a guard and a means of maintaining a sense of truth far greater than you would imagine. Internal dimensions, properly conveyed, are the most useful of the materials which we have. Incorrectly and shallowly used, they are the least useful. Burning the Kaaba. It is to draw attention to the essential that Sufis appear to attack the derivative or secondary. Attar tells how Shibli carried a flaming coal through the streets, saying that he was going to set fire to the Kaaba, the holiest place of Islam, so that people would concern themselves not with it, but with the Lord of the Kaaba. Explanation. Question. From your remarks and writings, I have observed people's behavior relating to higher knowledge and found it to be as you describe. People imagine that just because others have spoken of it, they are themselves candidates for this knowledge, without really listening to the people who tell them how to approach it. They also study selectively, expecting that the bits and pieces which appeal to them will give them what they want, not regarding the whole learning as necessary. They vie with each other for experiences, emotional stimuli, and even for personal credit and minor social advantages, while at the same time claiming that they seek higher things. What is your explanation, if you have one, for this absurd behavior? Answer. You don't need my explanation, because you only have to ask yourself what this kind of behavior means to normal people, and where it is to be found. You only have to ask an anthropologist or a historian of education or science for him to tell you that this is behavior characteristic of less advanced people, disadvantaged or barbaric ones, in the face of the introduction of something new to them. This analysis is impossible only to those who have not looked at the structure and who are misled by the superficialities, such as what the cult calls itself. If the people you describe were seeking, say, scientific knowledge or money, you would yourself be able to say at once that they are either savages or neurotics at worst, at best people who have virtually no basic information or training, enabling them to approach what they imagine they need so much. It is an important task to make this basic information available, so that people can get their feet on the starting line, as it were, rather than sprawling all over the place. Western culture prides itself on being able to tell one thing from another. This is an opportunity for its people to display this wholly desirable talent, training, and ability. When they do so in sufficient quantity and quality, real study can begin and cannot be stopped. In the East, of course, there is a convention whereby a teacher points out characteristic human behavior by adopting it himself, and this shocks or reminds others so that they learn without the defensiveness of their being tackled head-on being produced. This behavior keeps alive the sense that learners should not flatter themselves that they are important because they are engaged on a spiritual task, rather that they need due humility. When I was a small boy and went into my father's study one day and left the door open, he did not tell me to close it. Instead, he said, "Oh, I seem to have left the door open. Would you kindly close it?" That memory has stayed with me for over 40 years. Hiri and the Ashes. Abu Osman al-Hiri did much the same thing when someone tipped a quantity of ashes over him from a window. The people with him wanted to reproach the person who did it. But al-Hiri only says, "We should be 1,000 times grateful that only ashes fell on one who deserves hot coals." Question: why do you not speak more of God in your public utterances? Answer: the more usual complaint, which shows that you cannot please everyone, is that I dwell too much on matters of religion. But the reason that I speak less than others do about God is to be answered very much as Ibn Arabi is reported to have done. He said, "It is not worthy to deal with cleanliness when one is clearing up rubbish. Cleanliness is the result of necessary preliminaries." I admit, of course, that Arabi was brought before an inquisition for his love poetry, now recognized as great mystical literature. It is also reported that Rabia said, "To accuse someone who is preparing an apple from being concerned with its peel is sheer ignorance, though it may seem to describe the situation." A Sufi teacher of my acquaintance said in my hearing when someone asked him to talk about God, "It would be an insult to God to speak of him to you, and it would be valuing me too highly to assume that I dared to talk of God." Most people's God is their vanity, their own self-conceit, their epithet used for emotional and intellectual purposes. It is important to speak of a thing, let alone God, with reserve unless it be warranted. The using of the word God must depend upon the state of understanding of the person who uses the term and the person or people hearing or reading it. As Shabestari said in his Sufi manual The Secret Garden in the 14th century, if the Muslim knew what an idol was, he would know that there is religion in idolatry. If the idolater knew what religion was, he would know where he has gone astray. He sees in the idol nothing but the obvious creature. That is why, according to Islam, he is a heathen. Man, says Rumi in Fihi ma fihi, in it what is in it, has 3 spiritual states. In the first he pays no heed to God at all, but worships and pays service to everything, woman and man, wealth and children, stones and clods. God he does not worship. When he acquires a little knowledge and awareness, then he serves nothing but God. Again, when he progresses farther in this state, he becomes silent. He does not say, "I do not serve God," neither does he say, "I serve God," for he has transcended these 2 degrees.